Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. This week, the Prime Minister in his national address tried to soften the blow of the rise of last year's unemployment from 10 to 10.7%, with an optimistic tone that things are looking better, albeit slow. But there are some realities worth exploring on either side of the economic outlook. Tourism numbers are up in double digits. There are potentially billions in investments, bringing with them the promise of more jobs and opportunities. But with 3,000 to 6,000 students leaving school and entering the workforce annually, and an economy that by all indicators is still sluggish, what is the best that we can hope for? Tonight we talk dollars and cents with two former central bank governors, one of whom is a former finance minister, as well as the division chair of the Committee on the Ease of Doing Business. You definitely want to take notes for this one. It's all on the record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break.
On the Record is brought to you by Alive, the nation's newest and best LTE network.
Good to be alive.
Golf, and it was a great way for us to get out on Saturday morning. When I moved home in 2014, coming from the U.S., I was so accustomed to being on my phone, 24/7. And so when the unlimited package, was introduced with Alive, I was crazy excited. For me, with chatting with all of the parents and the students and such like that, my phone is my life. And so being free to be out here on the golf course, use my data, and not have any worries, it feels like I'm back in the U.S. again. So it's awesome, awesome service.
Hi, I'm here to tell you about the fastest way to purchase the vehicle you want right from home.
With SBT Japan, we import used cars from Japan straight to you.
Car ownership doesn't have to be hard. Go to sbtjapan.com and sign up for free. Search for the car you want, place your order, and make a payment using any one of our convenient payment options. Once you pay the duty and tax to our in-house broker, we will clear the vehicle and even deliver it straight to your home. Sounds too easy? Well, shouldn't it be?
In his national address this week, the Prime Minister said that more people have confidence in the country's economic recovery and more people are actively looking for work. In his response, the leader of the opposition called the Prime Minister's address a nothing burger, trying to pass for sensible public policy and accomplishment. And while there's always a lot of rhetoric when it comes to the economy, we have decided to try and give you some facts in our discussion entitled Dollars and Cents, a look at the state of the Bahamian economy. My guest tonight I'm very happy to have with me Julian Francis. He's a former central bank governor, former chairman of the board of BTC and chairman of the board of Commonwealth Brewery. Welcome.
Thank you, Joe.
Also, Mr. James Smith, another former central bank governor, former minister of finance and chairman of the board of CFAL. So welcome. Happy to have you on our show. And Christelle Sands-Feast, division chair for the Ease of Doing Business Committee. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're so very happy to have you all on tonight. We decided to do this show because a lot of times there is a lot reported in the media, and I call it, I see it, or I call it as regurgitation of what people are saying about the economy. And so it's important, I think, that we have real discussions, and so people get a sense of where we are. One of the things I said at the very beginning referenced the Prime Minister's comments about people having more confidence in the country's economic recovery. Do you find that people have confidence in it? Is that, in fact, the case, or is it just to try and make people a little more comfortable about what's happening? I'll throw it out there. Please, anyone?
Well,
Sorry.
maybe I'll take a crack at that first. I can't say that I would perceive in my own sort of interactions that there is any particular, let's say, increase in the level of confidence that people express about the outlook for the economy. I think that there is some optimism that, given that certain things seem to be stable and maybe improving, that things could change. But when you look at the outlook for the sort of the broad measurement of the economy or economic growth, 2%, which is true better than what we've been experiencing over the last 8 or so years, I think many people understand that that's not enough to make any significant difference in the quality of living. And so I believe that it's still going to take a little bit more time and continued demonstration of improvement before one could say that there is optimism.
James Smith, do you think people are optimistic? Do you get that sense that people feel that things could get better or are getting
Confidence
better?
and optimism are kind of opinions, right? We can have
Right.
different opinions, but there's only one set of facts. You can only have one set of facts. And what's happening in the Bahamas, we have to go back to the Great Recession, 2007, 2008. Bahamas was among the last countries affected by that recession to emerge from it. The Caribbean countries after 6 years, etc. And I think about 2 years ago, we began to bottom out and turn around, which also coincides with the largest single investment in the tourism industry ever made in this Caribbean area, which would be with $4.5 billion Baha Mar. So that would obviously have had an impact on the Bahamas because it was central to our major industry, tourism. I believe the employment levels there are now about 5,000. So the facts are, I think, that the Bahamas has bottomed out, it's turned around, it's probably not moving as fast as we would like. And while that was happening, our second largest industry, financial services, was being compressed. So the net effect, I think, is still positive in terms of the impact on employment. And I think the outlook is sanguine in the sense that the U.S. economy is heated up. We get about 80% of our visitors from there. And if they're feeling comfortable about, vacations, they look at the Bahamas. The bad side of that is we see this huge increase in ship arrivals and the air arrivals, which are really the bread and butter for the entire country.
Sure.
Haven't moved since about 1986, 1.2, 1.3 million air arrivals. So we know what needs to be done. And of course, the question of the confidence, I think, should be addressing, am I introducing policies or programs that would warrant increasing in those sectors? And so that the expectations of more jobs, could be realized. And the quick answer to that is, in the tourism sector, yes. Financial services, no. But again, it has nothing to do with local policies so much, but the pressure coming from the outside. So,
Christelle Sands, please, at the end of the day, you're going to ask, we can sit here and depending on who's in office and who's in opposition, there's going to be some discussion and different outlooks on the economy. But do people better off? Do people feel as if their lives are improving economically?
Jerome, from the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation perspective, the feedback we're receiving from our membership is that whilst there may generally be cautious optimism, our membership does not feel that there is growth, any growth at all. the feedback from our membership, the business community, is that there continues to be downward pressure on revenues. The cost of doing business continues to increase, and as a result, they are actually seeing a reduction in sales. They're seeing a reduction, increased pressure on their profit margins, and even in places where new developments have been announced, certain of the family islands, to Mr. James's point, Bahama, the Point, where there's cautious optimism, the average person, the feedback we're receiving is they do not feel better off. What they are feeling is that the cost of everything is increasing, and in some cases they're hopeful that development will come. But I think the genuine concern is, how will I participate? What is government going to do to make it less costly for me to do business so that I can compete with other service providers, so that I can actually increase my profit margins? So that's really generally what we're seeing, is that people don't feel better off. They don't feel it in their pockets, and that really is the barometer of, we can publish the overall statistics. The growth, I think James has indicated, is flat. But the reality is, the average Bahamian, if you ask them, they do not feel better off at all. They feel that their dollar is being challenged. They can buy less with that $1 than they could a year ago.
Is that tied directly, do you think, to the increase in value-added tax that we saw last year? Are we paying more? I mean, we are paying more for everything, but do you think that is a contributor to that?
That's the price effect of an increase in the VAT has definitely dampened the spirit of the local consumer, and that has to be juxtaposed with there's been no appreciable increase in incomes. So, if you go to the food store, it costs you more for the items on the same salary. I wouldn't be surprised if later on, unless we are able to get some growth, you might have more labor unrest.
Interesting.
The fact is, I mean, it's a very simple equation actually. If you're not increasing the revenues, the amount of money which is available to the populace through the economy, and at the same time the government is extracting $800 million in new tax revenue, which normally would be money which people would be able to spend themselves. And in fact, because of the fact that it's a consumption tax, the VAT, a lot of that money is coming from the lower income levels of the economy, because that's where there's less discretion as to how much of your money you can spend. And so the fact that you are taking that $800 billion out of a pie which is really not growing naturally means that people have less money to spend.
How does that then, I want to continue on that point, because in my own experience, since the increase in value-added tax, I have scaled back on some things that I normally would do. I don't eat out as much. Sure. I don't drive as much. It's just certain things I cut down my laundry bill. So money from me, I'm using myself now, that went into businesses that I was spending, I no longer do that. Mm-hmm. I eat at home. I iron my own shirts now a little more. And so, again, to the term the net effect, I mean, that is, if you look at others like myself, have people really scaled back in putting money into the economy?
Jerome, I feel that there is, to your point, absolutely, there is an increased focus from a consumer perspective on the cost of every single item. 2 years ago, or even after initially, consumers started to look at the price of items, everything they purchased in the grocery store, every piece of clothes that they bought, they looked at VAT, and there was an initial shock factor. But I think after that, we came to become accustomed to the 7.5%. Mm-hmm. That 4.5% increase, and remember, it was announced, I think, at the very end of May and introduced at the beginning of July, so there was a very little time to adjust.
There was no adjustment
exactly.
period, yeah.
So there's an increased focus by the consumer. If I have $100 to spend at the grocery store, I've had no increase in my salary, so I'm seeing that additional 4.5% paid to government. Having said that, I think we should also focus on there have been some positives in the sense that there's been a reduction in duty rates on certain clothing items and so on, which has had a positive net effect. And so we've seen businesses actually advertising that their prices compete with U.S. prices. But at the end of the day, the amount of discretionary income that is available in each household has not increased. What is the net effect of that? That means the focus has to be on reducing the cost of doing business so that business owners are able to realize some gain somewhere else because sales are not increasing.
One of the biggest shocks in the past few months has been this increase in electricity. It has affected in your own life, I mean, your quality of life. I mean, I live in virtual darkness in my house, I tell people. And then, again, that's an additional cost to business. Do things like this affect, I don't know if I'm using the correct term, consumer confidence in spending? Am I going to think twice about spending now because these things are affecting my pocketbook?
Yeah, but you're talking about the immediate impact correctly, but you must bear in mind that the Bahamian populace would have been belt-tightening for the last 8 or 9 years. And we see this in the high unemployment numbers. And then you increase the VAT. And the response to a price increase is usually a call for more higher income in order to accommodate it. But if you also have high unemployment, you're a little bit cautious about making too much noise to your boss because you don't want to join the unemployment line.
Yeah.
So this creates an added level of frustration for that same low-income consumer. So my feeling is there's a lot more frustration than meets the eye. You know, when you want to release yourself, I need more money, but I'm scared to ask for it.
Yeah, I've got to jump in with it. The Ministry of Finance just reported yesterday that the government would have to collect $1.6 billion in revenue from now until June to meet the revenue projections. Is that practical?
Look, I've looked at the snapshot which is being circulated this morning of the performance of the economy for the first 6 months, and of 18-19. So that's July to December. Yeah. And what you see is that, in fact, as we can understand, the performance of the fiscal performance of the government on both revenue and expenditure is down compared with what the government's budget really is for those 6 months. If you just sort of, take a 6 months as a half of 12. So that's an indication that the economy is not performing as well as the government had hoped or expected that it would when the budget was prepared or presented to Parliament. And so I believe that this expectation or this hope that there could be a recovery of this $1.6 billion in order to be able to meet the original budget is really quite, I believe, frankly, that Mr. Turnquest would probably agree, is optimistic.
Okay.
It's not going to happen, in my opinion.
Very quickly, though, before we go to break, we've got to go now, but the deficit shrank by 33% year on year. And I look at that and I go, well, that's great, from to say, but what does that translate into what does that translate into
the man in
for
the
me?
street is really unconcerned about
Right, exactly.
deficits. And the government is, I think, overly concerned about deficits. And as a result, the timing, let's say, of the tax increase was targeted at reducing a deficit over a certain period of time very aggressively. But it was brought into effect when you were just opening Bahama, your largest, so price, that would raise the price for everything you consume in the Bahamas, and including the visitors coming here. The price of, to recover which you may increase the price of the ticket on Bahamas there or the hotel room. So we did a price increase at the very time when you should have been doing the opposite, or like keeping things steady to see what the impact of this would be. And of course this affects not just our visitors, but we ourselves, because I've always argued that it's not necessarily a one-to-one, like you double the tax, therefore you get twice the revenue. Not necessarily, because the price has gone up with the items you begin to substitute. and so now you're getting probably less revenue than you projected. You know, I think all of these are kind of coming into those figures we're seeing. And it's not being critical. I think you have to go and revisit your budget every so often. And at the end of the day, the most important thing a government could do is think about the people it governs first. You know, the impact. And sometimes, that's why I say deficit, sometimes you have to live with it because you soften the impact
on the people.
Good. If
Sir,
you can make up for it in another period.
Most definitely. We are at the point of our first break. We are talking dollars and cents, the state of our economy. We'll be back with more on the record right after this.
Matt, where in the world is Matt Lauer? Where in the world is Ellison Greenslade? And so these about the low value of cottage in Atlanta. So we can talk about it.
More on the record tonight. The government's purchase of the Grand Lukine is a hot subject in the news. We're going to
and helps soothe acid reflux, improves your energy and metabolism, cleanse your colon, and neutralize acid in the blood. With our high pH levels, it's perfect for those with health issues, and it's affordable too. Drink your way to better health with Crystal Clear H2O. Live it, love it, drink it.
This portion of On the Record is brought to you by Generali Insurance Company Limited.
This week, Prime Minister Minnis said our growth and expansion of the agenda includes a dynamic mix of Bahamian and foreign direct investment. Since 2017, government has approved an estimated $3.7 billion in foreign investment projects. Tonight on the record, our topic is dollars and cents. My guests are Julian Francis, former central bank governor, former chairman of the board of BTC, and now chairman of Commonwealth Brewery. Mr. James Smith, also former central bank governor and former minister of finance, now chairman of CFAL, and Christelle Sands-Fils. She's the division chair for the Ease of Doing Business Committee with the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation. When we went into the break, we were talking really about this decrease in the deficit by 33%. Mr. Francis, you seem to differ that the government is too focused on reducing the deficit.
Right. Well, let me say this. What the numbers that have been published, that the deficit is 175 million or so on a budget so far for the first 6 months of about $1 billion. That's half of the annual budget, more or less. I think we all would say that that's far too much of a deficit. I mean,
you've got that much deficit. I mean, you're already starting from a, if I can use this term, you're already starting from a bad position. Eh?
The whole purpose of this, and James talked about it, I think, during the previous segment. The whole purpose of this new fiscal thrust is to be able to bring the deficit under control, to bring it within.
Why is that important? I mean, people don't always understand why. You think, oh, well, you're always going to have debt as long as you're alive. You're going to owe somebody for something. Why is that so important in an economic, when you're talking about the economy and in a budget?
The most important reason it's important is that simply it reduces the need for the government to tax in the first place to raise money. So it leaves more money in the hands of the populace. In other words, if the government has larger deficits, it's got to take more taxes in order to cover that deficit. A deficit is really an overdraft. It's an amount of money that you don't have that you've spent. And so you've got to find a way to to pay it off.
So now, but you're charging me additional value-added tax to try and service that budget, putting increased pressure on me. And as we said, you know, even in the break we discussed, there is still that increased pressure, but no release.
I think that we've accepted now that is at 12%. It is what it is. And so businesses are struggling to cope best they can. But the expectation was that as a set-off to that increase in VAT, there would be relief somewhere else. For example, the government would reduce the cost of doing business. There would be somewhere. You cannot increase your prices. Businesses can't just on a whim increase their prices. There's only so much room. There's only so much a consumer can bear. That is the practical reality of it. And so let's use an example. Whilst you talked about some of these projects and so on, and what the deficit really means, many businesses are operating in an overdraft position just like the government. What is difficult for the continued sustainability and growth of that business, which Mr. Smith, we were talking in the break, indicated the private sector is 75% of the economy, it means that, okay, my taxes have increased, my cost of doing business has increased. I can't hire people. I can't grow my business. I can't contribute to the growth of the economy because I am constantly in this negative position, just like the government. And year on year on year, it was 12% last year. You know, the concern is, when does it end? And to Mr. Smith's point, for the average person, what does it mean? Not just an increase in taxes, but we heard yesterday a resolution approved for increased borrowing. What does that mean? It has to be repaid. It has to be repaid.
While the increased taxes have come to reduce the deficit, we are still borrowing.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I think the expectation is there's more value, there's increased tax. We accept that we need taxes to reduce the deficit, open the schools, pay for the roads, but the expectation is that there will be an improvement in the quality of services, as I mentioned, so that there's something that you can touch, feel, see.
I can see where my tax dollars have gone.
Absolutely.
And we don't necessarily feel that. Or
Many
see that.
people do not
One
feel
of the indicators in an economy always is unemployment. The unemployment figure jumped from 10 to 10.7%. More than 25,000 people are still without jobs in the Bahamas. What does that say about where we are as a country, and where does that speak? What does that speak to in our economy?
I think it's perhaps one of our most challenging problems in the economy, because if you disaggregate that, meaning break it down, you will find that within that grouping, young people below the age of 30 are even higher amount of them, maybe twice that amount, 20%. And then if you break it down further, you'd find that the females in the Bahamas, young women, are really bearing the brunt of the unemployment. Consequently, in trying to address that problem, I think you have to look at a more targeted response, because at the end of the day, your economic performance should really determine the quality of life of all the citizens, you know, the dignity of having a job, and being able to maybe go to the food store and the prices are not going up. So in rearranging our affairs, I think the government has to recognize that it can, no matter how good the policies are, they can only go so far, and they affect less of the people than you would expect. Their reach, right? Like you were saying, you know, 25% of the economy is public sector. The rest is really the private sector. So if you want to make a greater impact, you find ways and means of incentivizing that sector to generate quality employment and that sort of thing, because we seem to have this disconnect that, we're doing well because the deficit is going down, revenue is up. Yes, but it's quite possible to have a balanced budget year after year after year and still have high unemployment.
Because those are the intangibles, those are the things that people aren't feeling. One of the things, though, in the recent numbers that I found interesting, the number of self-employed persons rose by 11.9%. And in preparing for the show, I was very curious as to whether these people were part of that unemployment number and decided, you know what, let me just go try and find some alternate sources of income, or are people really opening businesses and working for themselves? I mean, is that, I'm curious as to...
Be careful with that in the Bahamas. And I'll give you an anecdote. During the time before the sale of Batelco, and remember the cards, they were on every street corner, people, they used to count themselves as self-employed.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess that is my question. Are people just, I can't find a
The
job, so
definition
I'm
is
going to make
one thing. I'm not
lunch
sure
or
what it
I'm going to do things to try and supplement my income?
Maybe it's Crystal's turn, but I just would like to say this. I think that, in fact, yes, there is a lot more attempt by people to find solutions to this situation in which they find themselves. And frankly, I think we can see that. And to James's point regarding, he's just mentioned the sale of cards prior to the privatization of BTC. Fact is, if you look at the telecom sector today, we've got a whole cluster of businesses which have grown up around that sector. These are employed people and entrepreneurs who have set up a small business, 5, 10 people and so on, and this is a thriving sector. No, I think that there's no question that the self-employed sector is growing, and it is a part of the employment numbers. It's not, these people are not forgotten and counted as unemployed. But just let me quickly answer, if I may, for my part, the question you asked a minute ago about what it means that the unemployment numbers have been going up. What it means is that the economy is not keeping pace with the growth in the population.
3,000 to 6,000.
It's as simple as that.
Students are entering
It's
the
as simple
workforce.
as that.
Wow. Yeah.
We are not finding ways to grow and sort of expand our economy. That's the answer.
I think there's a very interesting dichotomy here, that one of the challenges that we constantly hear from our membership at the BCCEC is the difficulty in recruiting skilled persons. There is no doubt that the Bahamas has some of the highest qualified, skilled professionals, for example, in financial services, very experienced people in tourism. But nonetheless, it remains a challenge for businesses to recruit in certain key areas, people with certain IT skills and so on. So I think
just good customer service sometimes is a challenge.
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
I think that, so when you look at that unemployment number, some businesses, yes, there are certain realities, we just spoke about them. Their profit margins, there's downward pressure on their revenue, so they're unable to increase their workforce. But at the same time, they're looking to increase productivity, to increase efficiencies.
Sure.
And so they're looking for skilled employees who are able to contribute in a more efficient way to their bottom line.
Absolutely.
And that remains a challenge. And I think that Julian indicated that we have this very large number of students leaving school every year, but the question is, are we focusing on the right skills? Do they have the right skills?
Yeah.
And I think it raises the question about education reform. But to the government's credit, the Minister of Education continues to say there was an education loan program and people refused to pay.
Abused it,
and so the system was abused, the system is broken, and so those resources are not available. The idea was you obtain a loan, and then those funds are available. Exactly. And you focus and you focus on training in the key areas. Historically, we've said, okay, doctor, lawyer, accountant, and so on, but there is a need in other areas as well. And my final point, Jerome, is on entrepreneurship. Bahamians are inherently entrepreneurs. I mean, I'm originally from Eleuthera, and that's how you make it. You have to go out there, you have to hustle, you have to go out there and make it. But the point is that the barriers to entry are very high. Once you're in there, the working capital that is required is a challenge. And the last point is, those projects that the government has spoken about in Eleuthera, in Grand Bahama, in New Providence, there are a lot of entrepreneurs who simply wish a chance. They are bidding, let's use the man with one tractor. He wants to submit a bid. He's competing against the developer himself.
Yeah,
the developer
who has an entire fleet.
The developer can bring his stuff in under his Hotels Encouragement Act agreement, duty-free. The Bahamian, on the other hand, has to pay the cost of fixing his tractor. He has to pay the duty, has to pay the duty on his parts. Obviously, his price is going to be higher. So the expectation, certainly from Bahamians, is level the playing field. Give me a chance. I want to participate in this growing economy to the extent there are opportunities. Please give me a chance.
One of the things I wanted to speak to, though, 2 of the 3 most populated islands saw decreases in unemployment. Abaco and Grand Bahama increased while the unemployment in New Providence increased.
When I saw that figure, my immediate response, knee-jerk response was they probably had moved out of Grand Bahama back to Nassau because
I wondered
pressure.
about that.
And also to-
I didn't think that, but I questioned it as well. Like, what would have led
No,
to
we
that
saw this
statistic?
before.
Because I can't see any.
Remember when
just from looking at Grand Bahama,
when
maybe Abaco, yes, but
Atlantis
not
laid
Grand
off
Bahama.
during the recession. Atlantis laid off several hundred people all around.
Yeah.
People had to fly in from all of the family islands. Well, Grand Bahama was still doing okay. Grand Bahama, when it shrunk, many of their workers in the hotel sector went to Bimini because all the other guy was, the Jamaican guy was opening
Resorts.
right? And in the last couple of years, Grand Bahama's been severely hit. I mean, the economy.
Continuously.
And I figured that if any of them had any connections in Nassau or elsewhere,
Or even in
they had to
Bimini, or
move.
even in Abaco.
Right, so they
may have moved
stayed as long as they could. And I think that's what you're seeing, a
Well,
shifting of the
other-
population base.
I think the other comment would be that, with the exception of Grand Bahama, of course, these are relatively small economies, sub-economies. And so, you know, a movement of 50 people even is going to impact the numbers. I think we should not be as focused on these short-term, fairly small changes in the unemployment statistics. We need to look at the trends. Now, obviously, it's positive if we can say that in Abaco, the unemployment rate has gone down slightly. That's positive. Everybody is happy about that. But really, does it mean that much? I am not really that sure.
So we shouldn't be sort of focused on every
especially
statistic that comes out
when the context is that for the country as a whole, the unemployment rate is still creeping up.
Well, is that tied though to if I can use the term, political brownie points? I mean, if you're in government and unemployment
of course
decreases,
it is.
you say, hey, look, things are going well.
Of course it is. What I'm saying is that we should not be too easily seduced by the political arguments. So let's look at the substance. That's all I'm saying.
Hence, I brought this show together today. Folks, we are at the point of it. I know you got another point. We're at the point of another break. Stay with us. Our discussion continues right after this.
In the past, I've had a lot of issues with service, data service, drop calls. I was encouraged by a very close friend of mine to make the switch, and in doing so, my service has been impeccable. The data is very fast, it doesn't spool, it doesn't take long to load, so everything works beautifully. I like to know what my bills are, and it's important that I'm able to simply just pick up my phone and know what my bill is. The front line for the Valley Boys is comprised of about 200 members. It's very important because to be a successful leader, I need to be able to efficiently and consistently communicate with them. It works that way. It's beautiful. The data that you guys provide is flawless. I'm John Williams, chairman of the Frontline Dancers Association of the Valley Boys, and I believe in best.
Hi, I'm here to tell you about the fastest way to purchase the vehicle you want right from home.
With SBT Japan, we import used cars from Japan straight to you.
Car ownership doesn't have to be hard. Go to sbtjapan.com and sign up for free. Search for the car you want, place your order, and make a payment using any one of our convenient payment options. Once you pay the duty and tax to our in-house broker, we will clear the vehicle and even deliver it straight to your home. Sounds too easy? Well, shouldn't it be?
Just this week, it was reported by the Ministry of Finance that there is substantial revenue loss from fraudulent invoices, impacting up to 29% of the Bahamas' trade. A report shows that the Bahamas has one of the highest rates of customs duty and border VAT leakages due to phony invoices. Well, we're talking about the state of the Bahamian economy in dollars and cents tonight. My guests are Julian Francis, James Smith, and Christelle Sands Feast. That is a very significant issue as far as I'm concerned. We talk about we talk about a country and wanting to do better and wanting to do well, but we have a culture of dishonesty in some things that we do that impact the bottom line.
I think that story has a kind of a subplot. And you go to the financial services sector, we have signed a number of treaties and agreements with foreign countries, basically exchange of information on tax matters. And we never put forward the idea of a reciprocal access to tax information. Our largest tax is custom duties. And we've never, to my knowledge, formally approached the US government to get some information from their side on, say, double invoicing or the people who are robbing them. And in fact, in one of the agreements we signed, I think the FATCA, the US Treasury said in effect that this is a one-way street. You give us the information, but we won't be giving you information. So it's all a part of a policy complex, like it should be very important to us if most of our revenue comes from imports to be able to go and get information on our importers from that side. But I don't think, and this is not a criticism of the government per se, but you see it's in our national interest, right?
Yeah.
And we should be pursuing those sort of things. Whenever we go into an agreement, we said, well, okay, we're going to pass information to you, but we want you to pass information to us.
But these leakages in revenue, in customs duty and leakages in revenue across the board, that's nothing new.
No.
And it continues to affect the bottom line. And it bothers me that year after year, we still can't seem to effectively patch the holes from the huge leakage.
I think, if I can make 2 points. One, I think the government has indicated they intend to enhance their focus on compliance. But at the same time, I do not think that tax collection should be driven by the mantra or the view that everyone is a tax cheat. Bahamians have, and to our credit, we have developed a culture of increased tax compliance. I think the financial secretary himself has indicated that VAT is one of the most successful forms of, in terms of revenue collection, the amount of collection.
There's a lot of fraud going on at our borders, particularly with customs
tax systems you have fraud.
Okay.
But there's a theory, sorry.
But I think that the point to be made is the culture, there's an increased culture of revenue collection. The majority of businesses are actually complying. They're doing it above board. They're going to the border. They're producing their invoices. They're paying their tax. They're paying their VAT. They're paying the business license. So I think that's something that has to be balanced in conjunction is, yes, there is a need for enforcement, and we understand that's a reality of any regime.
Sure.
But at the same time, I think that there's an increased culture of tax compliance generally, and the majority of businesses you hear from, legitimate businesses, they are paying VAT, they're paying business license, and that's what's causing the pressure on the revenues that you're seeing on the other side of the scale.
I've got a spin-off question to that, but go ahead.
I certainly accept the 2 points, and I think they're correct. The thing is, though, that frankly, there are 2 things. One is we don't know what this number means because, as you said, Jerome, this has always been a problem.
Yeah.
And I suspect that in the past it's been a far larger problem than it is today. But the second point really is this. The fact is that this is a hugely difficult country to administer from that point of view. I mean, there are thousands of ways
and ports
that
of
you
entry.
can, that's right, you can avoid paying your import taxes in the Bahamas. I think that the move to VAT and the subsequent, presumably the subsequent move to more sophisticated forms of taxation will help to reduce this problem.
Well, it can also be addressed from another level, and it's this. The level of tax fraud is also a function of the size of the tax. In other
Absolutely.
words, when you have an income of X,
you're
right?
very right.
And you are saying that I'm a law-abiding citizen, right? I believe if you took 10% of my X to take care of things, I can live with that. But when you reach 50%, I don't feel like the fraud is really fraud. I think you were robbing me.
So I'm going to find creative ways to keep that money.
Right.
Think
what
about
they do in some countries? They actually look at the items you're taxing and this sort of thing. I don't want to get a technical argument, but you might find sometimes, let's say automobiles, right? You put a 40% tax on it, and you're getting so much revenue. If you put that to 20%, you'll have more imports of automobiles, and your take will be higher than that 40%.
Just let me
The
make
sensitivity, you see.
to make this point, which is linked to what James has said. I think that if Bahamians, I accept what Crystal has said about the increased compliance and so on. I think that's probably true. But if Bahamians, first of all, believe that their money was being well spent by the government, I think there would be more of a buy-in to the tax system. And then this is a real paradox, I think.
We're talking about taxation fees. Financial Secretary reported just last week that businesses were receiving business licenses within 48 to 72 hours of submitting completed applications. I thought to bring that up because, and I think you started to speak to it earlier, the ability to do business obviously affects the economy. Are we seeing an improvement in ease of doing business? I know this speaks directly to your area, but is it easier for people to start up and to maintain those businesses in this environment? Has that changed at all?
Well, let me answer your first question with respect to business licenses. The feedback that we're getting, the feedback certainly in my own practice that we're seeing is the process is substantially improved over last year. And this is the time for renewal of business licenses. Today is the 31st of January. So every business in the Bahamas had to submit their application for the renewal of their business license today. The difference between last year over this year is last year you had to go to 5 different agencies, get Ministry of Works, National Insurance Board, go and produce evidence of compliance with all these different regulatory regimes before you could apply for the renewal of your business license. This year you apply online, you submit your certification from your accountant and so on, and on the back end the government is doing the compliance verification on the back end, and that is well received and welcomed by the business community. Again, it goes to the bottom line. If it takes you 20-30 hours to renew your business license, that's 20-30 hours that it costs you that you're away from your business. I think that's the first point to make, that there is overall, people are very happy about the process. The increased focus on ease of doing business, it goes to Julian's point, it's about substance. We can say ease of doing business, but can people really feel it? And so this, I think, is a positive step where people can touch, feel, say, it is easier to do business. Overall, though, I think that there's an increased call, the volume is still as loud, that we need to continue that momentum and drive that through all sectors of the economy. Someone starting up a business, when we look at our ranking of the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business rating, we still have some challenges. We are still challenged in terms of the starting a business index. We need to reduce the number of processes. We need to make it simpler, and we have to adopt that model that using technology, in the same way that you're able to pay your VAT, pay your business license, do that online, that use of technology, that method has to be pervasive throughout the government system so that every touch point with government is a seamless process and move toward technology in a very deliberate way. We saw yesterday one of the purposes for this loan, IDB loan, I think that was approved yesterday, was increasing use of technology. People want to see, what does that really mean? What will change in my life? How will it affect my business? Will it mean, for example, that I can upload my National Insurance Board returns online so I don't have to go in person? All of these things contribute to what is my net income at the end of the day? Can I hire people? What is my profit margin? It is so critical to everything that we do. So we have to continue this momentum, and there has to be measurable deliverables so that borrowing the money is just the start of the process. People want to be educated. They want to understand, what are you going to use the money for? How will it improve my interface with this particular agency? What does it mean? And I think the final issue is, there cannot be, if there's a real transformation to the use of technology, there cannot be human intervention. Because in some instances you're seeing there's an increase, they say you can submit documentation online, but then someone at that same agency is saying, don't, still send me the hard copy, because they're still very attached. They want that piece of paper in their hand. So you have to be committed to the process. Once you're in, you're in. And we have to move towards that.
In the culture.
Absolutely.
The business is kind of looked at as a irritant, like you go to get an application to do this, to do that, or the other, and you're received as though you're a nuisance, okay? Whereas you need a culture where you recognize, as I say, 70% of all your activity comes out of your private sector. Recognize that as important. Consequently, the response from the public sector side, who are merely administrators, ought to be, it's important that I treat this as a priority. And those things would happen automatically. You see, there's a disconnect between how do I get a job, live in the economy comfortably, and the private sector that actually is providing this for you, because they're also paying taxes to the same public sector for you to carry out the services to service them.
Absolutely.
See, the government, in few occasions, they actually produce anything. You know, they provide a service to administer the state.
But people don't see it that way. They see it as
Exactly.
in the reverse.
Yeah, because you have to actually shift that. You know, when a guy comes to you, he needs a business license. First of all, he shouldn't be coming. He could send probably the lowest member of staff to get it. It's supposed to be so easy. And it should be that, oh, that's some X store. They've been operating here for 50, 60 years. They've been compliant, right? So they shouldn't have to go through the same, you know, I want my license, I'm sending somebody to get it.
Right. I think to the government's credit, they have introduced processes, they have had innovations where it is easier. But to your point, you have to reduce the level of human intervention so that it is easier on a consistent basis to get the business license and less opportunity for someone to actually intervene or interface with that process. They can do it entirely online. They don't need to send anyone.
Right.
And business licenses have extended their hours and so on to facilitate this type of thing.
And interesting, as we go to the break, you know, we're having this discussion now, and in my mind, I'm thinking, you know, this should have been something that we were implementing a decade ago. You know, this should have been in place a long time ago when you look at where the rest of the world is. We've got one more segment to go. If you are watching or just joining us, we're talking about the state of our economy, dollars and cents. We're going to be back right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true, and open debate they've been looking for.
And the icon goes to On the Record.
On the Record was born out of a desire to do something different. What we do every day helps our country, it helps our society, it helps to shape the views and opinions.
Listen, what is more dangerous? Gentlemen, we've got to move very quickly. Let's wrap up. It's all On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. Welcome back to On the Record. We've been talking about the state of our economy. My guest tonight, Julian Francis, Chairman of the Board of Commonwealth Brewery, James Smith, former Minister of Finance, now Chairman of CFAL. Both gentlemen are past central bank governors, as well as Christelle Sands-Feast, Division Chair for the Ease of Doing Business Committee with the Chamber of Commerce and Bahamas Employers Confederation. One of the things that is targeted to come on stream by the end of this year or early next year is the Credit Bureau. There's been a lot of talk about the Credit Bureau. Mr. Smith, you said recently the Credit Bureau will possibly lower the amount of non-performing loans that are still very high. Losses in the banking sector would be less, which would mean more profits, and hopefully that would translate to lower fees and lower interest rates.
Yeah, well, essentially, because of that credit crunch we had with growing amounts of non-performing loans, bank profits were severely impacted by that, and they started to make it up by putting on a lot of fees. If you do any banking, you'll see not only the existing fees were raised, but new fees were introduced. To get a letter from the bank one time ago, it used to be free. So they started to, I was comparing it to some international fee structures, and I think somewhere along the line, generally banking fees and commissions as a percentage of total revenue was, let's say, X%. And I think we went beyond that with the new fees, and that was a way of the banks recovering in part, the losses they would have made because of non-performing loans. Non-performing loans would tend to increase the less you know about the person who you're lending money to. And so if you have a credit bureau, it at least allows you to have a better feel on the lender. You know, is he likely to repay this loan or not? And so the quality of your loans are likely to go up. And when that happens, obviously the end result is your profits go up. And there'll be less need to take it from non-banking fees, you know, well, not non-banking, but the commissions and other add-ons. I mean, that's a likely outcome, but again, it's their decision. They may decide to just keep the money.
What the Credit Bureau will do, and this is for the benefit of our viewers, will really help institutions to know who you are, your history, your financial history, whether you are a good client, whether you're a risk or not, or your risk level. How is that going to affect a lot of Bahamian consumers?
I think from a business perspective, one of the challenges that we continue to hear for businesses is access to capital. And to James's point, if there's having regard to the number of non-performing loans and that big number, everyone is treated the same way. The good payers are treated in the same way
as the bad and the ugly.
Exactly, they're treated the same way. You know what this means? If I have been a business that has been diligent, I've paid all my bills on time, I've paid my loan payments on time, my interest rate should be lower than someone who has been delinquent. And so it allows me to take advantage of those opportunities. And remember, the Credit Bureau is going to source information not just from banks, but from other non-conventional sources. Do you pay your national insurance on time? So it looks overall. Right. So it allows the lending institution to look at you holistically and say, for example, okay, wait a minute, this is the application that's being made. This is a good compliant client, and as a result, I'm able to offer them a rate that is better than someone else. Otherwise, the cost of borrowing for everyone is very high, and it makes access to capital just very, very difficult.
I look at that though, and I look at the typical, I look at a lot of Bahamian consumers, and consumer loans are how we survive. I mean, we go to the bank for almost everything, or we go to an institution to borrow money for almost everything. How do you think that will affect our ability to do certain things? Because, we borrow a lot.
You want to look at the other side of the equation, though, and we keep forgetting this. You are borrowing other people's money.
Right.
You're borrowing your neighbor's money. All right? You put your money in the bank. Yeah. The bank's job is to lend that to you. Now, if the bank is lending money to someone who is a bad risk, you're threatening that guy's deposit. And it shows up in instead of paying you 5%, you pay him 0, making up. So we sometimes talk about the consumer, he's not going to be able to access this, he's not going to be able to borrow to get this. What about the saver, which would be his neighbor, right? He's putting his money in there. He would want a good return on it, but he's getting less and less because somebody refused to repay the money he gave the bank and the bank gave to you. So we have to look at the impact on everybody is all I'm saying. But I think at the end of the day, more information, better decision making helps the economy.
No question. Yeah, do you think it'll make us a little bit more fiscally responsible in what we do?
We have no choice. Better information available to the lenders will mean that they can make better lending decisions. It's simple as that. And you made a good point. It's true that if you compare us with some other countries, we are probably extended further in terms of the borrowing in our retail banking system and our commercial sectors. And it goes back to the comments we were making earlier about the fiscal deficit itself. That, if you compare the Bahamas with a whole lot of countries, we are extended further than we want to be. Now, we're not as far out as some, it's true, but we are getting worse. We have been getting worse over the last 20 or so years, and maybe today it's gradually now being reined in a bit. But I think that we will benefit from a regime where lenders can make better decisions.
I think
lenders and businesses, I'm curious as well.
Absolutely, because businesses, one of the biggest obstacles that we continue to hear to starting a business and operating a business is access to capital, because it's not just the initial barrier to entry, but for many, the ongoing capital that's needed, the working capital that's required, people find difficult to access. And as I mentioned, for many businesses, an overdraft is a reality.
Sure.
And the fee that you're paying on that overdraft is critical. We're moving to tech. We spoke about technology. We're moving towards technology, but every transaction that you do has a cost, and so all of those costs add up. So I think, to your point as well, I think what's important to bear in mind is it's a reminder. The credit bureau is a reminder that certain fundamental principles are never going to change. Entrepreneurship, saving, prudence. Those are critical drivers as well to all of the things that we've spoken about that are essential, and they underpin everything else. They are critically important as well in terms of driving the economy and what we actually as consumers have control over.
There is a
Mr. Smith,
downside.
you get the last point.
No, there is a downside. I don't know how large it is, but it could lead to people who, let's say, are bad risk, going to the loan sharks and getting high. It makes it worse for them because they get charged a lot of higher interest. In fact, a lot of this happened, I think, when the banks began to claw back. People were hawking furniture and this sort of thing to these loan sharks, having to pay 20, 30, 100% interest in the short term. I don't know how large that market is, but then again, you have that everywhere.
Yeah, well,
but by and large, the legitimate economy would benefit from.
Sure. So, folks, I just want to say thank you for having this discussion this evening. I think a lot of times, as I've said over and over, we get caught up in the political rhetoric and not always able to examine the facts. And so I thank you for coming on this evening and sharing facts with us and helping to put a lot of what's happening into perspective. Many times when you think economy, people think it's at such a high level that it's difficult to decipher. But at the end of the day, it really is about, the money that's in your pocket. And how we're living day to day and beyond. So thank you so very much for coming. We hope that you have enjoyed our show tonight, to our viewing audience. Also a special thank you to my guests, Julian Francis, James Smith, Christelle Sands-Feast, my producer, technical staff, and all of us here. We thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next episode. Once again, I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We'll see you next time.